Preetha Madhavan, who will be presenting the seminar entitled Managing Anxiety in Children and Adolescents. I think this is a topic that is of great interest to parents and to teachers, as there's been a notable increase in worries and anxiety levels in both children and adolescents, especially since COVID-19. Preetha Madhavan has over 10 years of experience as a practicing clinical psychologist. She is extensively trained in many therapeutic modalities and is committed to providing support and empowerment to children, adolescents, and their families. Unfortunately, she does not see adults, so she did ask me to convey that message across to you all. We are extremely privileged to have her here to share her knowledge and expertise on the subject with us today. Before I ask you to welcome her, I would just like to ask permission for us to be able to record this particular seminar so that it can be shared with other parents. If that is all right with you, may we proceed? The recording will stop at the question and answer stage, just to let you know. So it was with great pleasure we'd like to welcome you, Preetha, and please join me with a round of applause. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. It's my first time here at DAA, so it's been an honor to come here and speak to you guys. So today I will be talking to you about managing anxiety in children as well as teenagers. I do know you're parents of elementary students, but this is information for later as well. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the Lighthouse Arabia. So that's where I work. I've been with them for a little over a year. We are a team of more than 30 mental health clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, speech and language therapists, and an occupational therapist, all licensed by CDA and DHA. We offer lots of different services. So, of course, we offer the regular individual therapy, group therapy, couples therapy, counseling for children and adults. But we also offer mental health first aid. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but it's basically, it's a certification that helps, we do it for adults as well as adolescents, but to help recognize signs and symptoms of mental health conditions like anxiety, depression. Speaking of that, we have our next MHFA coming up on the 24th and 25th of November. That's an adult to adolescent MHFA, where it trains parents, teachers to recognize sort of the first signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression, as well as how to respond to it and how to support the adolescent. You can check our website for more information. I also want to talk to you about very specifically our support groups. So we offer a lot of free support groups that run once a month at the Lighthouse. Some of them are in person, majority of them are online. The ones that would be relevant to you guys, we've got a conscious parenting support group that runs once a month for parents of children of 6 to 11 years old, so I think that would be a nice one for you guys to check out. We've also got the single parent support group, a life after divorce support group, and a support group for parents of children with autism. All of these are free, all of these run once a month, and you can check out our website for where to sign up and for dates. Okay, so that's the housekeeping done. Now, today I will be talking to you about anxiety. I will begin by sharing some information on sort of the prevalence of mental health conditions, so not just anxiety, but mental health conditions in children and teenagers. And then I also kind of want to talk about why this number has steadily increased over the last years. And as Dr. Clark said, very rightly said, this number has definitely increased since after COVID-19. And then I will give you a bit of a background on anxiety, so kind of an anxiety 101, so you understand why we tend to feel anxious. I'll talk to you about healthy anxiety and when it tends to be debilitating, signs and symptoms, so kind of what to look out for in your children. And finally, I guess that's the most important part of how you as parents can help. So, outlining some sort of day-to-day strategies and skills that you can help your children build and sort of deal with that anxiety. So, just to zoom out and give you the bigger picture of what's really going on with our children. So, like I said, mental health disorders are increasing at an alarming rate. The most recent research shows that 1 in every 5 kids is struggling with mental health conditions, but like I said, this number has probably gotten higher since after COVID. Anxiety tends to be the most commonly diagnosed condition in this population. Again, different kinds of anxieties affect children at different ages. So, for example, phobias and separation anxiety are more common in young children. Social anxiety develops sort of at a later age, around sort of that 8 to 12, and of course with teenagers, as peer relationships and social connections become a lot more important. Okay, so why, we're noticing that our children are more anxious, mental health conditions are increasing a lot more. Why is this the case? So, I think, a lot of it is to do with the fact that we, as parents, we tend to be quite overprotective. We're forever involved, trying to kind of cushion our kids from, any sort of disappointment, any sort of difficulty. It's almost like we're bubble wrapping them, right? Think of it this way, like we as parents today are high intelligence and very creative. So we tend to be a bit more sort of paranoid, worrying about the what ifs, and we tend to project this onto our children, thereby creating that anxiety for them. So we're always supervising, we're always protecting, overscheduling, overmanaging, and this does tend to lead to anxiety symptoms in children. The other problem I find is that, again, we're over-involved. So their problem becomes our problem. I'm going to teach you how to fix this. They might come home from school one day saying, oh, I had an argument with Jack. He was being really mean. He snatched my toy. We immediately come in, I'm going to speak to your teacher. I'm going to try and figure out how this can, how we're going to solve this. It's not okay for Jack to treat you in this way. Whereas we're losing the essence of kind of teaching them to problem solve, teaching them to manage these difficult situations. With older kids, maybe they're not getting along with their teacher, or they seem to have better problems there. Instead of allowing them to feel like I am capable of sorting the situation on my own, I have those problem-solving and decision-making skills, we're quick to kind of jump in and solve it for them. What happens is, if our kids don't struggle, they're not going to learn to problem solve, because they know it's always going to be done for them. So how are they going to develop those skills unless they struggle in the first place? And then we have a little bit of that entitlement. I think we see that quite often in kids these days. And yes, they should definitely have a voice that is considered. They should feel validated. They should feel like they're heard. But it's also important that we're not bending over backwards to accommodate them. It's about their choice in food, their choice in kind of what we're going to do over the weekend. So it's important that we're also teaching them to deal with disappointment, to deal with not having things going their way, because that is a reality. That is definitely going to happen to them at school, in the community, but we need to set them up with skills on how to deal with that. And I think this is kind of, I don't know, a product of social media, or I don't know what to put my finger on, but that sort of overemphasis on positive feelings, on kind of always being happy, everything is always great. That also kind of sets up, difficult emotions like feeling angry, feeling sad, feeling worried as something that you shouldn't be feeling, something that's alien. But all these feelings, they're natural, and they each inform us of something, right? So we don't want to move away from not feeling angry, not feeling sad. How many times have we said to our kid, like when they're sad because, I don't know, they didn't get something, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. Don't be sad, it's nothing to cry about. that the sense that they get from that is that that feeling doesn't matter. My sadness or my disappointment doesn't count. I should always focus on being happy. And of course, that's impossible to always be happy, but when they realize that disconnect, that can cause anxiety because I'm not happy, so there must be something wrong with me. And also when, we as parents have our expectations too high. So it's important that, we expect things from our kids, yes, but we're realistic with those expectations and we're accepting their limits and their capabilities. And also teaching them to manage their expectations and setting sort of realistic boundaries for them and teaching them to deal with that disappointment. Okay, so now I want to give you a bit of a background in terms of anxiety, fear, so all of us have fear. Every animal, including human beings, has a fear response, that fight or flight, right? And that basically keeps us safe. It's a survival mechanism. But because of our complex brains, we as humans are the only species that has anxiety. Now, what is anxiety? That ability to turn on that said fight or flight response with our thoughts alone. So I'll give you an example to demonstrate that. So a zebra out in the wild being chased by a lion will have that fight or flight response. The heart rate will go up, etc., and he, runs off to safety. But once he is safe, the zebra is not thinking about, oh gosh, what if that lion comes back again? He goes back to homeostasis and he's not worried. He's not anxious about being chased by that lion again. Contrasting that to, someone who has, for example, been yelled at by their boss will come back home and continue to replay that situation again and again and create those same physiological responses that they had at the time of being yelled at by their boss, and then create that anxiety of going into work, etc. Now, fear, like I said, is normal. Fear is me walking down this, a dark alley worrying that I may get robbed. Anxiety is me coming back home and thinking about that, replaying that situation, getting super worried, anxious, not being able to sleep. And then when that carries on for more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks where I'm struggling to sleep, I can't leave the house, I'm not eating, now that is debilitating. That's when anxiety is an issue, and that's when we need to kind of step in and manage it. Now, I've got this little diagram here for you with, so this is kind of to show you that anxiety is on a spectrum, and there is something that's healthy anxiety. So I want you to think of anxiety as adaptive. It's important we feel that because anxiety tells us what's important to us. So I was pretty anxious before I walked on stage today. I made sure I prepared for this presentation. That's anxiety. That's healthy because it's making sure that I don't come on stage and forget my material and make a fool of myself. But let's say I wasn't able to sleep last night. I was having panic-like symptoms here on stage today. Now that is debilitating. And on the other end of the spectrum, if we didn't feel anxious at all, we would be really careless. We wouldn't be preparing for things that are important. We wouldn't be, we wouldn't be preparing. We wouldn't be setting ourselves up for those situations. So anxiety is actually quite helpful, and I want you to think of it as adaptive. It's telling us, it's informing us. So the goal then, when dealing with anxiety with our kids, is not to get rid of it. We just want to teach them how to manage it. And that's kind of the message that we want to say, we want to serve in our communication with them. It's okay that you're feeling anxious. I understand that this is really stressful, but let's think about what is going to be helpful. What can you do about it, right? So teaching them again that it's okay, it's valid that you're feeling this way. So these are some signs and symptoms, of anxiety and when your child might be anxious. Now, I do want to say that, certain levels of worry and anxiety are common in children and teenagers as they're adjusting to new life situations, as they're dealing with stressful situations. But I also want to say that the impact of this anxiety in young children is oftentimes clinically significant even before they've had a diagnosis. So what I'm trying to say is that it is under-recognized amongst especially young children. And thinking of sort of age groups and what sort of are common fears, so that kind of gives you an idea of, okay, I know, my child is around this age, these are kind of the things that they would normally be anxious about. That kind of gives you an idea of, is this mild, is it moderate, is it severe? So common fears in infants, for example, is loud noises, fear of being dropped, whereas with toddlers, they experience fear of imaginary creatures like monsters, fear of darkness, not wanting to sleep alone. From the age of sort of 5 to 6, children start experiencing worries about their physical well-being as well as worries about their family's physical well-being. School-age children, they tend to worry about school performance, behavioral competence, like am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I following the rules? Also rejection by peers, that tends to be pretty big in school-age children. And of course, as they become teenagers, they start worrying about social competence, getting along with others, etc. And I want to say that signs and symptoms of anxiety, those things, yes, they are quite obvious, but in real life, they might not always be very obvious. So, this is kind of where you're paying close attention to your child's behavior, to what your child is saying to you on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, an anxious child might ask a lot of questions because they're really anxious about what's coming up. So, there may be these sort of what-if questions. What if this bad thing happens? What if that bad thing happens? What they're trying to do is they're trying to understand what's coming next and reduce that anxiety that they're feeling. Of course, asking questions in young children, I know that happens a lot, but pay attention to things, especially those what-if questions and them kind of going over the same information again and again. You will come to pick me up from school today, right? You will be there, right, Mom? That tends to be a sign of anxiety because they're really concerned about who's going to come get me after school. Also, young children tend to seek a lot of validation, so they do doubt themselves and their self-worth. So, they might appear quite needy, constantly kind of asking for that reassurance. Are you mad at me? Do you love me? Am I going to be okay? So that is also a sign that your child might be worried about something. They may be, they might not be able to express what exactly they're worried about, but this is sort of the first step in helping them identify that. And also a lot of children with anxiety tend to complain of physical symptoms. I think you might be aware of this. So, children with anxiety will complain of headaches, tummy aches, feeling tired. So again, once we've ruled out that sort of physical cause, it's also important to consider, might there be something emotional going on for this child? Also, children with anxiety struggle to go to sleep and to stay asleep. So children with anxiety, I think it's about 30 or 40% of them struggle to initiate sleep. So it's, when they go into bed and when the lights are off and it's quiet, that's kind of when their mind starts to race. So they really struggle with initiating sleep, and if they're able to sleep, staying asleep. So waking up with nightmares, night terrors, coming into your room to sleep in your bed, these are signs that your child may be kind of struggling with that. Also, a need for control. So you might notice that your child has suddenly become very sort of inflexible and wanting to control every little thing around them. What's happening here is they're so overwhelmed by their negative thoughts and their fears, and also that uncertainty about the future. They're trying to exert control in any way they can. So, it might seem like, no, I'm not going to bed, or, they're being really defiant, not listening to what you're doing. It's important to consider.
الرجاء الانتباه، الرجاء الانتباه. تم الإبلاغ عن حريق في المبنى. الرجاء إخلاء المبنى حالا من أقرب مخرج. الرجاء عدم استخدام المصاعد.
We need to exit from that door, down the staircase and out onto the
A fire has been
playground.
reported within the building. Please leave the building immediately by the nearest exit. Please do not use the lifts, but leave the building by the nearest stairway.
الرجاء الانتباه، الرجاء الانتباه. تم الإبلاغ عن حريق في المبنى. الرجاء إخلاء المبنى حالا من أقرب مخرج. الرجاء عدم استخدام المصاعد، لكن اخرج من المبنى من خلال أقرب درجات.
Attention please, attention please. A fire has been reported within the building. Please leave the building immediately by the nearest exit. Please do not use the lifts, but leave the building by the nearest stairway.
الرجاء الانتباه، الرجاء الانتباه. تم الإبلاغ عن حريق في المبنى. الرجاء إخلاء المبنى حالا من أقرب مخرج. الرجاء عدم استخدام المصاعد، لكن اخرج من المبنى من خلال أقرب درجات.
Attention please, attention please. A fire has